What would you do if, on the day of your wedding, a homeless man walked down the aisle beside you and the entire US military showed up to salute him? In the small town of Fairhaven, nestled between aging maple groves and sun-bleached rooftops, mornings came quietly. The streets were narrow and familiar, the kind where footsteps echoed too loudly, and people smiled with their lips but watched with their eyes. Here, time moved slowly, comfortably for some, oppressively for others. Amelia Bennett, 28, had lived in Fairhaven her entire life. She wasn't the kind of woman who drew attention. She didn't post on social media or speak above a whisper. Her clothes were plain, her hair always tied back, and her world revolved around Bennett's Bakery, the family shop that had stood on Main Street for over 4 decades. She lived in the modest apartment above the bakery. Each morning, before the ovens were hot and before her staff arrived, Amelia slipped through the side door and into the quiet kitchen. The warmth of the early dough, the faint hum of the refrigerators, the soft click of the lock behind her, this was her sanctuary. But her first task of the day had nothing to do with croissants or cinnamon rolls. She made a lunch, always simple. A turkey and cheese sandwich, or peanut butter and jelly if she was out of deli meat, a piece of fruit and apple when they were in season, a small bottle of water, and one final touch, a paper napkin with a handwritten note. Today's note said, "You are not invisible. Someone sees you." She folded it carefully and placed it on top of the sandwich like a blessing. Then she slid everything into a plain brown bag, wrapped the handles around her wrist, and moved through the back door without a word. Behind the bakery was an alley, clean, swept every weekend by her own broom. Against the far wall sat an old wooden bench, warped by time and weather. And on that bench, as he always was, sat a man. He never spoke, never asked for anything. Just sat. He was older, perhaps in his 70s, with dark, weathered skin and hands that rested quietly in his lap. His clothes were worn, but meticulously cared for. His boots, cracked and faded, were always laced. He wore a heavy military-style coat, the kind with patches too faded to read. Amelia approached slowly, respectfully. She set the bag down on the far side of the bench, never too close. Their eyes met briefly. She nodded. He did the same. That was it. Then she turned and walked back inside. Inside the bakery, one of the younger employees, Lana Green, leaned toward the new hire. "She does that every single morning," she whispered. "Feeds that old man like he's a pet ghost or something." The new guy laughed, unsure. "Maybe he's her secret boyfriend?" The staff giggled. Amelia said nothing. She kneaded dough at the prep table, her movements steady, her shoulders tense. She had heard the whispers before. They didn't surprise her, but they still stung. Later that morning, her manager, Mr. Harold Fisher, pulled her aside. "We all admire your compassion, Amelia," he said gently, hands folded like a school principal. "But some customers are uncomfortable seeing a homeless man behind the store. Might be best for business if we," he paused, "if we don't encourage vagrancy." Amelia just nodded. She didn't argue, she didn't protest, but she changed something after that conversation. She started coming in 15 minutes earlier, before the bakers arrived, before anyone could see. She made her kindness smaller, quieter, but not less. That afternoon, her mother, Evelyn Bennett, stopped by to drop off some cake samples for the local florist. She lingered, sipping coffee and judging in her usual whisper. "I drove past this morning," she said. "Saw you out back again. Honestly, Amelia, it's not safe. That man could be sick, or worse." "He never moves," Amelia replied softly. "Exactly. That's even more concerning. You don't know what kind of man he is." Amelia said nothing. Her mother had always been this way, polite on the surface, polished in every room. But the moment she saw someone down on their luck, she crossed the street without a thought. That man, Evelyn added with finality, is not your responsibility. But Amelia disagreed. To her, he wasn't a threat. He was dignity wrapped in silence, a presence erased by the world, noticed only by those who cared enough to look, and Amelia had always looked. The wind was sharp the next morning, one of those spring days that flirted with winter on its way out, crisp air, grey sky, and a stubborn chill that lingered under your sleeves no matter how fast you moved. Amelia Bennett arrived at the bakery 15 minutes earlier than usual. The kitchen lights flickered on with a familiar hum. She tied her apron in silence, her fingers moving by memory. As the oven preheated and the dough rested beneath linen cloths, Amelia repeated the ritual. Sandwich, apple, water, and one napkin. But today, her pen hesitated. She tapped it twice against the counter before finally writing, "You matter, even when the world pretends you don't." She folded the note, tucking it atop the sandwich, and placed everything gently into the brown paper bag. By now she could have done it with her eyes closed, but she didn't. She did it carefully. Intentionally. Because this bag wasn't just food, it was recognition. The alley behind the bakery was still. No wind back there, no judgmental stares. Just the same uneven bench and the same man, Colonel Samuel Whitmore, though Amelia didn't know his name yet. He sat as he always did, straight-backed, hands folded in his lap, eyes cast somewhere far away, as if watching memories drift just out of reach. She approached, placed the bag on the bench, and stepped back. Their eyes met. For a second longer than usual, she nodded. So did he. And then, for the first time in over a year, something changed. He reached for the bag while she was still standing there. Normally, he waited until she walked away. It was a quiet rule between them, no expectations, no interruptions. But not today. Today he unfolded the top and pulled out the napkin. His fingers, weathered and slow, turned it over. He read the message, then his hand stopped. His shoulders shifted just slightly, barely visible to anyone but her. He looked up, and this time, he smiled. It was small, so small it could have been mistaken for a twitch, but it wasn't. It was real. Amelia felt something stir in her chest. She didn't know why, but her eyes stung, and her breath caught in the cool morning air. She said nothing, neither did he, but it was enough. That afternoon, Lana Green, the younger assistant, leaned across the bakery counter and whispered to a customer. "She's still feeding that old guy every single day. Probably thinks she's saving him or something." The customer chuckled, shaking his head. "She's wasting her time. People like that don't change." Amelia stood just 10 feet away, dusting flour from a baking tray. She didn't turn, didn't react, but her fingers tightened around the tray until her knuckles turned white. It wasn't the gossip that hurt. It was the dismissiveness, the way they spoke of him as if he were less than real. A blemish on the alley wall. A ghost, a warning, they didn't know him. And yet, they spoke with certainty. That was the part that made her want to scream, but she didn't. She placed the tray down quietly and moved to the back kitchen, letting the scent of rising bread calm her thoughts. That night, she walked home slower than usual. The lights from the bakery glowed behind her. The alley sat in darkness now, empty, but she paused near the bench anyway, as if expecting to see him still sitting there. Of course he wasn't. He never stayed past the morning. She wondered where he went. Did he sleep in a shelter? Under a bridge? In the woods? She would never ask. Because he had never asked for her help, never spoken a single word. But somehow, in their quiet exchange, they both understood something others didn't. He didn't need rescue. He needed presence. The next morning, she repeated the ritual again. This time, she added an extra napkin blank, just in case. But when she approached the bench, something was different. There was a small object tucked beneath one leg of the bench, weighed down with a pebble. She crouched down. It was a napkin. Her napkin. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was jagged, uneven, shaky from age or lack of practice. But it was legible. Just 4 words. Thank you for seeing me. She stared at the napkin for a long time, holding it gently between her fingers, like it might disappear if she gripped it too hard. The air around her felt still, suspended. No crowd. No audience, no applause, just a quiet acknowledgement that her kindness had landed. Back inside the bakery, she placed the napkin in her wallet, between old receipts and a faded loyalty card. It stayed there, folded carefully, close to her heart. She never told anyone about it, not her mother, not Andrew. Not even her co-workers. It was hers, and it was enough. By the time spring had fully stretched across Fairhaven, whispers about Amelia Bennett had grown louder. Not the kind you could pretend not to hear anymore. They slithered through the aisles of the grocery store, echoed in the pews of Sunday service, and crept behind the counters of her own bakery. They came wrapped in sarcasm, sealed in pity, and always spoken just loud enough to sting. "She's wasting good food on him," one customer muttered as she stirred her coffee at the window table, every single morning. "She's always been a little off," someone else added with a knowing smirk. Too soft for her own good. Amelia heard it. She always had. But lately, it started to weigh heavier. It wasn't just gossip. Now it was disapproval from people who mattered to her. Or at least, people who were supposed to. That afternoon, her mother, Evelyn Bennett, stopped by the bakery. She was dressed impeccably, as always. Cream-colored coat, pearls, lipstick that never smudged. She walked in with the breeze like she owned the place. "Your hair's falling into your face," she said as greeting. "Morning, Mum," Amelia replied, brushing a loose strand behind her ear. "I ran into Carol at the florist," Evelyn continued, sipping her tea. "She mentioned seeing you behind the shop again, with you-know-who." Amelia didn't answer. Her mother leaned in slightly, voice lowering, even though no one was nearby. "I worry about you, sweetheart. Truly. This obsession with helping people who've made their choices, it's not healthy." "He hasn't asked for anything," Amelia said calmly. "Exactly," Evelyn snapped, a bit too fast. "And you don't know anything about him. For all we know, he could be dangerous." "He's not," Amelia said, firmer now. "You don't know that," Evelyn pressed. Amelia looked down at the counter. Her hands were still dusted with flour. The back of one was pink from leaning too long on a hot tray. She thought about the note still folded in her wallet. "Thank you for seeing me." "You always did get too attached," Evelyn added, with a sigh that was meant to sound maternal, but felt more like condemnation. "You gave too much of yourself to things that don't give back. That's not kindness, Amelia. That's naivety." Amelia didn't respond. Because what would be the point? Her mother didn't want to understand. She wanted control. She always had. That night, at her apartment, Amelia sat at the kitchen table with her fiancé, Andrew Carter. He was kind, practical, a man who believed in action plans and spreadsheets. He wasn't cold, just logical, which meant he loved Amelia for her heart, but often didn't know what to do with it. "You've been quiet," he said between bites of leftover pasta. She shrugged. "Just a long day." "You saw him again?" She nodded. He didn't react immediately. He just chewed a little slower, set his fork down more gently than usual. "He still doesn't talk to you?" he asked. "No. And you're okay with that?" "I am." Andrew leaned back in his chair. "I mean, I think it's admirable what you're doing, but also, I don't know, Amelia. Maybe there's a limit to how much of yourself you give to someone who doesn't want help." Amelia looked at him. He wasn't being cruel. He was being honest. And in a way, that hurt more. "I don't do it to help him," she said. "I do it because he exists, and too many people walk right past that." Andrew nodded slowly, his brows drawn. "I get that. I don't want people taking advantage of you. He hasn't. Not yet. By the end of that week, the bakery staff had started openly mocking the morning ritual. She probably thinks it's romantic, Lana Green joked one morning. Like some kind of tragic fairy tale. Poor girl and the mysterious old vet. Amelia had walked in on the comment just as Lana was laughing. The room went still. No one apologized. Amelia didn't say a word. She simply walked past them, tied her apron, and began rolling out dough. But her shoulders were stiffer than usual, her breathing slower. And though she didn't show it, the words had landed. Because it wasn't just strangers now, it was everyone. Later that day, her manager, Mr. Harold Fisher, called her into the back office. He was a thin man with tired eyes and a voice like sandpaper softened by diplomacy. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Amelia, I want to start by saying you've been an asset here. Truly. The sentence was a warning in disguise. She knew it before he said the next word. But there's been discussion, concerns. Customers have noticed the man behind the shop. I know. They feel uncomfortable. She tilted her head slightly. Because he exists? Harold sighed. Because he's close to the building. It's a business, Amelia. We're in hospitality. People want clean sidewalks and smiling faces. And they want to pretend people like him don't exist. That's not fair. It's true. He didn't argue, but his silence was louder than any reply. That evening, Amelia stood in her kitchen, hands resting on the counter. The world outside her window was dimming, the streetlights casting long shadows across the sidewalk. She watched as a neighbor walked her dog, paused, waved at someone passing by, and continued on. So normal, so unaware. And somewhere out there, Colonel Whitmore, though she still didn't know his name, was likely finding a place to sleep. A bench, a church step, an alley deeper than hers. She thought of the way he had smiled, just barely, and how much it had meant. She thought of all the people who couldn't see past the surface, past the dirt, past the silence. She wasn't trying to rescue him, she just wanted someone to be seen, and right now it felt like no one saw her either. But the next morning, as the sky turned from black to pale blue, Amelia stood in the kitchen once again. She made the sandwich, packed the apple, wrote the note. You are not a burden, you are a story still unfolding. Then she stepped into the alley, brown bag in hand, and placed it gently beside the man on the bench. Their eyes met, and once again, they both nodded. Quiet. Simple. Seen. The bakery's windows were dusted with condensation that morning, fogged by the ovens inside and the changing season outside. Amelia stood in the front display room, watching the town wake up. Fair Haven in late spring smelled like lilacs and wet concrete. It was a season of weddings and weekend fairs, where people trimmed their hedges and pressed their shirts, preparing to be seen. Amelia, however, was quietly preparing for something else. Her wedding was only 3 weeks away. The invitations had been mailed. The florist confirmed. Her dress was hanging in a garment bag in her closet, untouched since the final fitting. Everyone around her called it the perfect plan. But to Amelia, something about it all felt unfinished. That afternoon, she sat at her kitchen table, alone, with the last few blank invitations in a neat stack. She had been meaning to address them to Andrew's distant relatives, people she'd never met. But her mind was elsewhere. She looked down at the ivory envelope in her hand. Heavy cardstock, elegant font. The kind of paper that felt expensive when you touched it. But her hand didn't move, because this envelope wasn't for a cousin in Delaware or a family friend from college. This one was for him, the man behind the bakery, the man no one else seemed to notice unless they wanted to complain. She didn't even know his name, and yet she had thought of no one else more. He had never spoken, but in his silence He had become a fixed point in her life, more steady than most people who had RSVP'd. She pulled the blank card from its envelope and picked up a pen. Her handwriting was slow, deliberate. "You are welcome at my wedding. It would mean a great deal to see you there. Amelia." No name. No return address, just an offering. A silent extension of inclusion. A way of saying, you matter here, too. The next morning, Amelia left earlier than usual. She tucked the envelope between the sandwich and the apple, anchoring it in place with care. As she approached the bench, the man was already seated, just like always. She didn't say a word. She didn't look for acknowledgement. She placed the bag down, paused for a moment, and then walked away. The air was unusually still. No wind, no traffic, just birdsong and the rhythmic sound of her boots on brick. It was done. That evening, her fiancé, Andrew Carter, stopped by her apartment with takeout and a wedding planner binder under his arm. "Table seating," he said, "and music." They ate sesame noodles off mismatched plates while listening to instrumental jazz. "I think we should put your mother near the band," he joked. Amelia smiled but didn't respond right away. Her mind drifted. "I invited someone today," she said finally. Andrew looked up. "Someone not on the list," she added. He raised an eyebrow. "Who?" She hesitated. "The man behind the bakery." Andrew put his fork down gently. "The homeless man?" She nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Do you think he'll come?" "I don't know." Andrew leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Well, I guess if he does, we'll find out." He wasn't angry. He wasn't enthusiastic either. Just uncertain. It was the best she could hope for. The next few days passed quickly, filled with fittings, checklists, and phone calls. But every morning, before any of it began, Amelia walked into that alley and left her quiet invitation. There was no response, no napkin, no sign. But she didn't need one, because the gesture had already shifted something in her. One afternoon, as she helped sort silverware in the bakery kitchen, she overheard Lana Green whispering to a customer. "She's seriously inviting that guy to her wedding," Lana said with mock concern. "I mean, imagine the photos." The customer laughed awkwardly, then muttered something Amelia couldn't make out. She kept polishing the forks, her hands steady even as her throat tightened. Later, she told her mother, "A mistake. Evelyn Bennett set her teacup down a little too hard." "You did what?" "I invited him," Amelia repeated calmly. "You don't even know his name." "I know enough," her mother scoffed. "Do you know what people will say?" Amelia looked her straight in the eye. "They already say it." Evelyn didn't respond. For once, silence was all she had. That night, Amelia sat on the edge of her bed, the wedding invitation from that morning still on her mind. It had been untouched, still sealed. She reminded herself that wasn't the point. The point was the offering, the dignity of inclusion. Even if the answer was no, the message had already been delivered. "You're not invisible. You're welcome here. I see you." She turned off the lamp and settled beneath the covers, the city quiet outside her window. Somewhere, she imagined, the man was unfolding her note for the first time. Or maybe not. Maybe he never would. But the act of inviting him had already started rewriting her definition of belonging. Not just for him, but for herself. The morning of Amelia Bennett's wedding arrived like a page torn from a bridal magazine. The sun climbed slowly over Fairhaven, casting a soft gold across the rolling lawn of the Langston estate, where white chairs had been arranged in perfect rows and ivy curled around the wooden archway where she would soon say her vows. Inside the bridal suite, everything sparkled. The room was filled with hushed voices and the hiss of curling irons. Bridesmaids posed for photos, makeup artists bustled, and Evelyn Bennett, Amelia's mother, circled the space with a clipboard in one hand and a complaint in the other. The centerpieces are off-center, Evelyn said, frowning. And who approved the seating chart? There are 3 accountants at one table. 3. Amelia stood near the window, her satin gown brushing against the floor, her veil catching the light. But she wasn't listening. Her gaze drifted beyond the garden, toward the main gate at the edge of the estate. She wasn't looking for flowers, she wasn't looking for her groom, she was looking for him. Minutes passed, then suddenly, there he was. He stood near the gate, still and upright, wearing a faded but freshly pressed suit. His boots were polished. A scarf green wool, the same one she had once left for him, was wrapped neatly around his neck. Colonel Samuel Whitmore, though no one here knew his name. He carried no gift, no bag, just himself. His posture was quiet, his presence unshakable. From behind her, one of the bridesmaids glanced out the window. "Who's that man?" Amelia didn't answer. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet she wasn't even supposed to be holding yet. Because he had come. He had read the invitation. And he was here. Outside, the guests were beginning to take their seats. Soft music played. Laughter bubbled up as champagne flutes clinked and distant relatives hugged with practiced politeness. No one noticed him. Not yet. Amelia turned from the window, her heart thudding with something between joy and fear. She slipped out of the suite without a word. Down the hallway, through the kitchen corridor of the manor house, and out onto the gravel path, the silk hem of her dress catching on stone. She didn't care. Her steps quickened until she was standing in front of him, face to face. His eyes met hers calm, steady, the same as they had been on the bench all those mornings. But here, in the sunlit garden, they seemed to hold something more. Not surprise. Not discomfort. Recognition. He hadn't just shown up. He had chosen to. Amelia extended her hand. He looked down at it. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. Together, they turned toward the ceremony. And at that moment, the silence behind them shattered. It began with a whisper. "Is that?" Then a louder voice. "Who is she walking in with?" Amelia heard them but didn't flinch. As they moved toward the aisle, the murmurs grew sharper. "That's the man from behind the bakery." "Is she serious?" "You've got to be kidding me." Her mother rose from her chair, pale with horror. "Amelia," she mouthed. "What are you doing?" Amelia didn't respond. She walked forward, Colonel Whitmore at her side, her fingers wrapped lightly around his arm. They weren't walking like strangers. They were walking like something deeper, witnesses to each other's worth. Near the altar, Andrew Carter, her fiancé, stood beneath the arch, eyes wide. The officiant, a kind-faced woman with silver hair, looked toward Amelia as if silently asking, "Should I continue?" Amelia didn't nod. She just kept walking. And then came a sound no one expected. A low, distant thumping. Helicopters. Heads turned skyward as 3 black helicopters crested the trees and hovered just beyond the estate. The music stopped. Guests stood, squinting, shielding their eyes. From the side driveway, a procession of black SUVs pulled in. Doors opened. Out stepped men and women in navy dress uniforms, their boots gleaming, medals glittering in the sun. At the front of the group was a tall, silver-haired man with the bearing of someone used to leading people into the impossible, General Robert Kingsley. He approached the aisle with practiced steps, then lifted the microphone intended for the ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice crisp, "before this wedding continues, we ask for a moment." Every guest went still. He turned toward Amelia and the man beside her. "This is Colonel Samuel Whitmore," the general announced, recipient of the Silver Star, veteran of 3 tours. He saved 23 lives in a single night in Afghanistan. Gasps echoed. He lost everything in a fire upon returning home. He disappeared. Until now. He paused. and he was brought back not by a medal or a mission, but by a woman who simply saw him. A hush fell over the garden. Some guests cried. Others stared in open shame. The general handed something small and shining to Colonel Whitmore, but the colonel didn't pin it on himself. He turned to Amelia and gently fastened the medal onto the edge of her wedding gown. A quiet gasp rippled across the crowd. Then the general saluted her. So did every soldier behind him. Amelia stood in silence, not as a bride, but as a woman seen clearly, finally, for what she had done without ever asking for praise. She glanced up at Whitmore, who gave her the faintest nod. And it was then that Andrew stepped forward. His voice was low but clear. "Sir," he said to the colonel, "it would be an honor if you would walk her down the aisle." Whitmore looked to Amelia. She smiled. He nodded. And so they walked, arm in arm, past every guest who had once whispered about her, who now saw not shame, but courage. The garden had never been so quiet. Not even the birds dared interrupt. Amelia Bennet stood at the end of the aisle, her hand still gently resting on Colonel Samuel Whitmore's arm, the silver star he had pinned to her gown glinting faintly under the late morning sun. A moment earlier, she had felt like a scandal. Now, she felt like something else entirely. A witness to truth. The music had stopped. The officiant stood frozen beneath the ivy-covered arch. Guests stared, many with flushed faces, unsure whether to sit or stand. Somewhere in the crowd, a child whispered, "Mommy, why did the army come?" And then, from the back of the formation of uniformed soldiers, a second voice rose, younger, stronger, raw with memory. "I served with Colonel Whitmore." Heads turned as Captain Eric Monroe stepped forward, tall, crisp, composed, but clearly moved. He saluted the colonel, then turned to face the guests. "I was 24 when I met him. Afghanistan, Fallujah. We were ambushed, pinned down. I took shrapnel to the leg and couldn't move. I was sure I was going to die." The crowd leaned in, silent. "He didn't wait for orders. He didn't wait for backup. He just ran back for me again and again, while bullets sliced through the dark." From his pocket, Monroe pulled out a weathered photograph, its edges curled. He held it up. It showed a younger Colonel Whitmore, face streaked with dirt, fire behind him, carrying a wounded soldier over his shoulder. "I would have bled out in a ditch if not for him," Monroe said. "He carried me 2 miles through enemy fire. Then he disappeared. No ceremony. No press. Just vanished." The photograph made its way down the aisle as if passed from hand to hand, even though no one touched it. Eyes widened. Throats tightened. All of Fair Haven people, who had once chuckled at the man on the bench behind the bakery now, looked at him differently. For the first time, they saw him. Amelia didn't move. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from fear, but from something heavier. A strange grief, maybe. Grief for all the times he had been dismissed, ignored, whispered about like a blemish on her story. And all along, he had been carrying a history bigger than anyone's comfort zone could hold. He had worn silence like armor, not because he was weak, but because he had nothing left to prove. And she had never asked for proof. The general stepped forward again. "The United States National Guard owes a debt to Colonel Whitmore," he said. "But today, we honor not just a soldier, but a civilian, a woman who, without knowing a single chapter of his story, treated him with dignity. Every morning, for over 2 years, with no expectation, no agenda. Just kindness." He turned toward Amelia. "Miss Bennet, you reminded one of our finest what it means to be seen." There was no applause, no fanfare. Just stillness, reverence. Even Evelyn Bennet, Amelia's mother known for her poise, her posture, her relentless control, had nothing left to say. Her lips were tight, her eyes glossy. Her fingers clutched the edge of her clutch like a lifeline unraveling. Amelia turned to Whitmore. He was calm, but his jaw was tight. She could see it, the years in his shoulders, the weight in his spine. The cost of service, the grief of anonymity. He hadn't come for redemption. But somehow this moment had given it to him anyway. A collective hush fell over the garden. Then Amelia did something no one expected. She took his hand again and said softly, "You don't have to leave." He looked at her, expression unreadable. But before either could speak, Andrew Carter, her groom, stepped forward from beneath the archway. He extended his hand toward the colonel, not stiff, not forced, but steady. "Sir," Andrew said, "I'd be honored if you'd stay with us. If you'd stand with her." "With us." Colonel Whitmore blinked once, then slowly he nodded. He didn't take Andrew's hand. Instead, he placed his own hand on Amelia's, firm and weathered, like a bridge being built across generations. And just like that, the ceremony resumed. The officiant, her voice softer now, stepped forward and opened her book. But this time, the words she spoke were no longer just about marriage. They were about presence, about choosing each other in full view of the world, its flaws, its judgments, its unexpected guests. As Amelia and Andrew exchanged vows, the soldiers stepped aside, forming a silent corridor of honor. When the rings were placed, when the final words were said, and the couple declared husband and wife, no one cheered right away. They just stood, watching, soaking in the gravity of what had unfolded. Not just a union, not just a ceremony, but a reckoning. At the reception, whispers became apologies. Stares turned to glances of quiet respect. Guests approached Amelia in twos and threes, not with gossip, but with soft, sincere voices. "I had no idea." "He's incredible. You must be so proud." She thanked them, nodding, but her mind stayed on something else. A napkin, folded, tucked in her wallet. "Thank you for seeing me." Later, she found Colonel Whitmore standing near the back of the garden, alone beneath a string of fairy lights. He wasn't eating, just standing, watching. Amelia walked over. "You didn't have to tell them," she said. "I didn't," he replied. "They did." She paused. "Why did you come?" He looked at her then, eyes steady. "To return the favor," he said. "You saw me when no one else did. I thought maybe today I'd return the grace." She smiled softly. Neither said anything more, because nothing more was needed. The morning after the wedding, Amelia Bennett woke before the sun. The manor house was still, except for the soft creak of the old wood floors and the distant sound of staff quietly resetting the world. White chairs were being folded. Ivy was being untangled from the arch. Champagne bottles stood empty beside silver buckets, still beaded with yesterday's sweat. The celebration was over, but the weight of it remained. Amelia sat alone in the bridal suite, a pale robe draped over her shoulders. Her dress hung near the window, its hem slightly wrinkled, a silver star pinned to the bodice like a secret she didn't want to tuck away. In her hands, she held the medal. It wasn't shiny, it wasn't new, but it glowed with something more lasting than polish, meaning, and it felt heavy in a way no gown ever could. Later that morning, she joined Andrew in the sunroom for breakfast. He was sipping black coffee and flipping through a folder of wedding photos that had already arrived from the photographer. They rushed a few previews, he said, sliding one across the table. Amelia looked down. The image showed her and Colonel Whitmore standing at the top of the aisle, just the two of them, framed by rows of silent guests and a sky that had somehow turned bluer in that moment. He wasn't smiling, but he stood tall, and beside him she looked not nervous but resolved. "It doesn't look like a wedding," she said softly. Andrew chuckled under his breath. "No, it looks like something else." She stared at the photo for a long moment. Then she folded it gently and placed it in her lap. "I want to do something," she said. Andrew looked up. "Like what? Not a shelter, not a soup kitchen, something different. Smaller, quieter. He tilted his head. Go on. I want to create a space where people don't have to earn kindness, where they don't have to tell their whole story just to be fed or treated with dignity. Andrew nodded slowly, absorbing her words. You want to build something. I want to build presence, she said. A place like that bench behind the bakery, but warmer, safer, human. He leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping the side of his mug. She could see him thinking it through, not with hesitation, but with care. Then he smiled. Then we'll build it. They called it the Quiet Table. Not a center. Not a program. Just a simple name for a simple idea. A row of tables and chairs under an open awning, where anyone could sit and be served a warm meal, no questions asked, no forms to fill out, no stories required. They rented a small lot near the edge of town, tucked beside the community center. It had once been a storage yard, its fencing rusted and weeds grown tall. Most people passed by without noticing it at all. But Amelia noticed. To her it felt like potential. They cleared the space by hand. Andrew's co-workers volunteered on weekends. Friends from the bakery donated leftover bread. Local carpenters brought reclaimed wood. A florist gifted pots of lavender to line the walkway. It wasn't beautiful, but it was honest. Warm, real. On the first day, they served 12 people. Mostly older men, 2 women, 1 little girl with dirt on her knees, and a shy smile that melted Amelia's heart. Amelia cooked the meals herself, chili, cornbread, sliced fruit. No uniforms, no hierarchy. Just her apron, her hands, and the quiet conviction she had carried every morning down that alley behind the bakery. She didn't ask names, but sometimes they told her anyway. A man with scarred hands told her about the time he slept under a truck stop billboard in winter. A woman with hollow eyes whispered that she had once been a nurse in Fallujah. Most said nothing. That was fine too. She served them food and silence. And it was enough. Colonel Whitmore never returned in person, not once. But every month, like clockwork, a postcard arrived. The first came in a plain white envelope with no return address. The image was of a mountain range. On the back, written in his familiar uneven script, "Every breakfast is a salute. Thank you." The second came from a desert. The third showed a snowy forest. The fourth had no picture, just a blank front and 6 simple words: still walking, still grateful, still seen. Amelia pinned them to a corkboard in the back prep station of the Quiet Table. Sometimes, when she needed strength, she'd run her fingers along the edges, just long enough to feel anchored again. Soon, others joined. First, a young woman named Carla, who had seen a wedding clip online and driven 2 counties just to volunteer. Then came a retired Marine who had served under Whitmore and recognized his name in a newspaper blurb. Then more. No one asked for credit. They just worked, served, sat with strangers, listened without fixing. The Quiet Table became a quiet movement, not of headlines, but of hands. Of chairs that didn't discriminate, of meals given without scrutiny, of presence over pity. Amelia never gave interviews. She declined media offers, turned down photo ops. "It's not about me," she always said. "It's about making people visible again." And in that, she found more purpose than any reception line or registry could offer. One cold morning, Amelia arrived early to light the heaters. As she unlocked the gate, she froze. 12 men stood silently inside. They weren't sitting, weren't waiting. They were standing in formation, shoulders squared, eyes forward. At the front stood Captain Eric Monroe, the soldier who had spoken at her wedding. He stepped forward, extending a white lily. "We'll be taking shifts volunteering here," he said. "This isn't something we'll let fade." Behind him, each man stepped forward one by one and laid a single lily on the long-serving counter. 12 lilies. 12 moments of silent gratitude. Amelia didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat closed with emotion. Andrew arrived minutes later and quietly took her hand. "They showed up at dawn," he whispered. Amelia nodded, her voice finally returning. "They understand," she said. By the end of the second month, the quiet table was no longer a quiet experiment. It was a lifeline. Word had spread without flyers, without hashtags, without announcements. Just whispers. And people came. Veterans, mothers, teenagers with nowhere to go after dark. A man who had once been a math teacher. A woman who carried a Bible with no pages left inside. Some came hungry. Some came lonely. All came without needing to explain why. Because Amelia had made it clear, this was not a place for proving worth. It was a place for being seen. One overcast Tuesday morning, as Amelia opened the side gate to begin prep, she paused at the corkboard inside the serving station. It had become something of a sacred space, covered in thank-you notes, hand-drawn pictures, and the monthly postcards from Colonel Whitmore. But today, she added something else. She reached into her wallet, the same one she had carried every day since the bakery, and pulled out the folded napkin. It had yellowed around the edges. The ink was slightly smudged from time and fingertips. "Thank you for seeing me." 4 words, scrawled in trembling handwriting by a man no one in Fairhaven had noticed until he walked beside a bride in front of everyone who once tried to look away. She pinned the napkin to the top of the board, just above the first postcard. Then, beneath it, she added her own handwritten line. "Everyone who sits at this table has a story worth knowing." It wasn't a mission statement, it wasn't branding. It was a truth. And now it had a home on the wall where everyone who passed by could feel its weight. That afternoon, Amelia served lunch to a man with a long scar across his cheek. He didn't say much, just nodded when offered food and took his seat in the far corner. But before leaving, he walked up to the counter and tapped the edge of the board. "I didn't think anyone remembered people like me," he said, voice low. Amelia looked at him, not with sympathy, just with presence. "I didn't remember for a while either," she replied, and that was enough. The days blurred. Volunteers rotated. Donations arrived unprompted. The garden next to the lot began to bloom with lavender and basil, thanks to a retired horticulturist who now tended it every morning before coffee. Andrew came by every evening after work, rolling up his sleeves and helping wipe down tables. He never asked for credit. He just showed up. That was something they had in common now, Amelia and Andrew. Not perfect understanding, but shared practice. Some mornings were hard. The soup would burn. The heater would fail. A driver would yell something cruel out a car window as he passed by. On those mornings, Amelia would stand in the corner by the corkboard, press her fingers gently against the napkin's edge, and remember. This matters. One day, a schoolteacher named Lisa brought her students for a visit, not as a lesson on charity, but on community. They helped set the tables, served water, and read aloud poetry to guests who wanted to listen. One boy asked Amelia quietly, "Why don't you ask them who they are?" Amelia smiled. "We don't need their stories to give them dignity," she said. "But if they want to tell them, we're here to listen." The boy blinked, then nodded. The next day, a woman approached the counter holding a small leather book. "I've been writing letters," she said, not making eye contact. "Not to send, just to write." She held one out. "I wrote this one for whoever wrote that napkin." Amelia took it gently. "Would you like me to post it on the board?" The woman hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." Amelia placed it next to the postcards. No one needed to know the full content. Just that someone cared enough to write. By the time fall arrived, the quiet table was no longer just a place. It was a presence. a rhythm in the town. Even people who never ate there began to drop off fresh produce, extra canned goods, flowers. Sometimes they stayed to eat. Other times, they just said hello. Small shifts, but undeniable ones. Evelyn Bennett came by once. She didn't stay long. She brought a box of napkins, perfectly folded, the kind with embroidered corners.
"This is cleaner," she said. Amelia smiled. "Thank you." She didn't use them.
But she appreciated the gesture. Even her mother, rigid and prideful, was learning how to soften, bit by bit.
The next postcard from Colonel Whitmore arrived without an image, just one line. "Still walking, still grateful."
Still seen. Amelia added it to the board. She stared at it for a moment, then whispered aloud, "Me too." One morning, just as frost began to return to the air, Amelia arrived to find someone had placed a fresh paper napkin on the corkboard. The handwriting was different, but the message was familiar. "You are not invisible. Someone sees you." She didn't know who wrote it. She didn't need to. That was the point. Kindness, once planted, grows in the silence where applause never reaches. And now, the quiet table had become a garden of grace, rooted in presence, watered by community, harvested in dignity. The first snow came early that year. It dusted the rooftops of Fairhaven in a whisper, settled gently on the rusted fences around the quiet table, and clung to the branches of the community garden beside it like powdered sugar. Amelia Bennett arrived just after sunrise, as she always did. She turned on the space heaters, checked the pantry shelves, and started a new batch of lentil stew in the slow cooker. The air smelled of thyme, garlic, and something warmer than food belonging. Andrew came by mid-morning to fix a loose bench leg. He kissed her cheek without words, set down his toolbox, and got to work. Their routines had become effortless. No grand gestures, just quiet partnership. A few volunteers trickled in before noon. Carla, the high school English teacher, and Sergeant David Hill, who had become the informal parking director, rain or shine. Everything felt familiar, until it didn't. Just after the lunch crowd thinned, Amelia looked up from wiping a table and froze. A man stood near the gate. Older now, a little thinner, his coat different. But his posture, the way he held his shoulders, the quiet power in stillness unchanged. Colonel Samuel Whitmore. He hadn't sent a postcard in over 3 months. And now he was standing in front of her. No announcement, no fanfare. Just presence, like always. Amelia stepped out from behind the counter and walked toward him. They stopped a few feet apart. "I thought you were still walking," she said softly. "I was," he replied. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something carefully folded. A napkin, the same kind she used to leave tucked inside the brown paper bags. She unfolded it. The message was hers, but on the back, in his uneven handwriting, he had added, "And now, I'm home." They sat together at one of the back tables. He didn't eat. Just sipped the coffee she brought him, black, no sugar. Around them, people carried on serving, chatting, scraping plates, but no one interrupted. Those who recognized him gave a silent nod. Those who didn't just saw a guest, exactly as it should be. Amelia finally spoke. "I didn't think I'd see you again. I wasn't sure I'd come back. What changed?" He paused, eyes on the steam rising from his cup. "I needed to see if it was still real." Amelia tilted her head. "And is it?" He looked around. Took in the garden, the board with his postcards, the 12 white lilies now dried but still standing, the table of men talking quietly beneath the heater. Then he nodded. "It's more than real," he said. "It's legacy." They sat in silence for a while. No need to fill it. No need to explain. When the sun dipped lower in the sky and the first hint of evening crept through the clouds, he stood. Amelia rose with him. He looked at her, The same way he had that morning in the alley, years ago, when a sandwich and a note were all she had to offer. And as before, he nodded, a small, deliberate motion. Then he said something she hadn't expected. "I didn't come back to be served," she raised an eyebrow. "I came to volunteer." That night, as Amelia locked up, she left the lights on longer than usual. Inside the prep station, she stood in front of the corkboard and stared at the napkin she'd just pinned up. "And now I'm home." It was more than a sentence. It was a circle, closed, a life restored without rescue. A man reclaimed without spotlight, a community changed not through loud reform, but through one woman's quiet refusal to look away. 2 weeks later, Colonel Whitmore began showing up twice a week, always early, always with his sleeves rolled up before the sun had fully risen. He chopped vegetables, sorted canned goods, occasionally helped build new shelving with Andrew. He never took over. He never explained himself. He just worked. One day, a teenage boy approached him and said, "Sir, what did you used to do?" Whitmore didn't answer right away. Then with a wry smile, he said, "I used to disappear." The boy blinked. "And now?" Whitmore looked across the garden, where Amelia was laughing with a mother and child over a spilled carton of juice. "Now," he said, "I stay." By the time Christmas came, the quiet table had served over 3,000 meals. The townspeople no longer whispered when they passed. Some stopped in to help. Some sat and stayed. Fairhaven hadn't become perfect, but it had become aware. And sometimes, that's even more powerful. That Christmas Eve, after the last guests left and the tables had been wiped down, Amelia found a small wrapped package on the counter. No tag. Inside was a frame, simple, wooden, handmade. Inside the glass, a napkin, not one of hers. One of his, the first one. "Thank you for seeing me." Beneath it, in the same careful script, "Thank you for staying." She held it for a long time, then hung it beside the corkboard, not above it, beside it, where equals stand. It was a Thursday morning in early spring when Amelia Bennett arrived at the quiet table to find a single envelope waiting on the serving counter. No return address. No stamp, just her name in blocky, deliberate handwriting, Amelia. Inside was a note short, sparse, written in the same careful script she had come to recognize over the years. "Time moves differently for people who've once disappeared. I didn't expect to stay this long, but I'm glad I did. I'm leaving again this time by choice. Don't worry, I'm not vanishing. I'm simply walking forward. The table remains." Whitmore. No explanation. No destination. Just that. Amelia folded the note slowly, her fingertips pausing at the creases. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just stood there for a while, long enough for the coffee to burn slightly in the pot behind her. Colonel Samuel Whitmore was gone by the time the sun was fully up. No fanfare. No goodbyes. He left the same way he had entered her life, quietly, without warning, without asking permission. But this time, he didn't leave empty. This time, he left a place better than he had found it, a place that had found itself. In the weeks that followed, the quiet table continued its quiet rhythm. Meals were served, tables were wiped, stories were shared, some whispered, some shouted, some never spoken at all. The volunteers didn't ask about Whitmore. They didn't need to. His presence was everywhere, woven into the grain of the serving counter, the slope of the garden bench, the rhythm of the ladle hitting the soup pot. One of the new volunteers, a teenage girl with a hesitant smile, once asked, "Did he start this place?" Amelia thought for a moment. "No," she said, "but he helped me remember why I had to." She pinned his final note beside the napkin that started it all. Now the corkboard held more than words. It held a timeline of becoming. Folded notes. Cards from strangers. Postcards from cities Whitmore never mentioned. Doodles from children. Thank you letters signed with initials only, and just above it all, still yellowed but intact, thank you for seeing me. Years passed, the lot was repaved. The garden expanded, a covered shed was added in the back for cold weather storage, and someone eventually donated a brand new commercial oven, though Amelia insisted on keeping the battered stovetop too. The heart of the place still beats through the old things, she told Andrew, who had learned long ago not to argue with that kind of poetry. They had a daughter, named her Nora Grace. She took her first steps between the long tables at the quiet table. By 4, she could serve soup without spilling a drop. By 6, she had memorized half the stories on the corkboard. And by 8, she asked the question Amelia had been waiting for. "Mom," she said, tugging on her sleeve, "who was Colonel Whitmore?" Amelia smiled. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked her daughter over to the corkboard, knelt down beside her and pointed to the napkin. "This," she said, "is who he was." Nora frowned slightly. "A note?" "A voice," Amelia said. One that hadn't spoken in a long time. And when it finally did, it reminded all of us what kindness really means. Nora stared at the napkin for a long time, then whispered, "I think he's still here." Amelia looked at her daughter, this small, fearless being, who had never known a world without the quiet table, and replied, "I think you're right." Some nights, when the wind came strong through town, Amelia would stand in the empty lot after cleanup, look up at the sky and whisper, "Still walking, still grateful." She hoped, wherever he was, Colonel Whitmore could hear her. And more than that, she hoped he knew he had never truly left. The town changed, slowly but unmistakably. People paused longer before crossing the street. The bakery behind which everything had started reopened under new owners, who kept a framed photo of Amelia and Whitmore at the register. Not because of who they were, but because of what they had reminded everyone. That dignity is not earned. It is given, offered, protected. One fall afternoon, long after the napkin had started to fade, a young man arrived at the quiet table and asked to speak with Amelia. He held out a photograph, creased, water-stained, but still clear. It showed Whitmore in uniform, younger, medals pinned to his chest. "My father served with him," the man said. "He told me what happened at the wedding. Said it changed him, that it reminded him who we are before the world tries to make us forget." Amelia looked at the photo for a long time, then smiled softly. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked. The man nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I think I would." By the time the quiet table reached its 10th year, Amelia had stepped back from daily service. She wasn't needed the way she once was, and that was the point. The table remained. One morning, as she watered the small herb garden beside the awning, she noticed a napkin pinned to the board. She hadn't placed it there. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Younger. But the message was familiar. "You are not invisible. Someone sees you." Amelia stood quietly, eyes closed, the sun warming her back. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just breathed in deeply and let it go. Because this was what legacy looked like. Not a statue, not a speech, but a table that remained, warm, open, quiet, forever. In a world that often measures value by noise, performance, or success, the quiet table reminds us that the deepest forms of dignity are offered, not earned. Through Amelia's quiet persistence and Colonel Whitmore's silent resilience, we learn that small acts of kindness, done without recognition, can reach farther than any grand gesture. The story teaches us that presence matters more than perfection, and that seeing someone for who they are, not what they've lost, is the most profound gift we can give. For older Americans who have lived through seasons of sacrifice, change, and sometimes invisibility, this story offers a gentle truth. You are still seen. And more than that, you still have something to offer, whether it's a story, a hand, or a chair at your table. In every quiet moment of compassion, we shape the world not through noise, but through remembrance. The legacy we leave isn't in medals or monuments, it's in how we make others feel valued, visible, and home. Let us carry this lesson into our own lives. Slow down, see others, and never underestimate the power of staying.